We are perfectly designed to achieve what we're currently achieving. This is axiomatic to some degree, and that therefore we can look at what we're currently producing and say, well, you know, there are factors there that leaders have done or haven't done that actually have caused what we are. There is a design factor here. And so I think that we have to ask the question, surely, you know, after so many years of how many sermons, how many theology books, I mean, I'm going to guess at 15 million, and I think that's probably conservative. I mean, if more of that was going to resolve our problems, I think we would have been there a long time ago. So clearly, you know, there's something in the prevailing forms, the inherited ideas of the way we do church and everything else, and be, you know, discipleship, that is that's failing us. And I think that we have to put preaching in its inherited form under scrutiny. Well, I think preaching then ought to become a function of leadership, but not divorced from the rest of leadership and what leaders seek to do and communicate. I think leaders should embody what we're calling others to do. I remember hearing a black preacher once. It was a wonderful, I won't try and take it off entirely, but I remember him saying, "You cannot teach what you do not know. You cannot lead where you will not go." And I remember thinking, that's something there. I think you can't preach what we don't know. And I think that often, you know, if these ideas are abstract pieces of theology that are not our own truth, this goes back to Kierkegaard again, and I think we distort the truth that we seek to convey. I think we've taken mission so far out of the equation of church that church as a whole seems to me to have some basic flaws in it. Once you take mission out of the equation, effectively removing it from being a defining agenda for the church, it seems to me that everything that we do then is bound to be done within our own confines or within the four walls of the church, and have very little implication beyond that. So, I mean, as an advocate for missional church, I think the thing that we need to recover is that missiology precedes or informs ecclesiology in all its form, including preaching. That somehow we've managed over time, and over many centuries, we've managed to live without any effective missiology guiding our actions. And what missiology or missions will kind of force us to engage our context round about us, to kind of reinterpret our message in the light of the symbols, contextualize them in the light of you know, our situation and our context. And I think it's a renewal. Mission drives us to rethink our symbols and not to just rely on our inherited ideas. The best way to learn chess, I'm told, is to remove the queen from your equation before you start. Now the queen, of course, is the key player. And by actually removing the queen, you have to learn how to use all the other elements. I wonder whether we've over-relied on preaching, to be honest, at least in the way we've received it. That maybe we need to set it aside a while and learn the other elements in the mix and then replace it. Because otherwise I think we'll just kind of reproduce what we already know. We'll just go on about preaching in the way that we have done to this point. We need to go into a place of learning and asking questions. What does preaching mean in light of missions? Does it have a place? I suspect it will, but I think it'll be in a different way. I think some of the things that might change or ought to change is that preaching should bring meaning to what we're already experiencing. Okay? It's similar to what we've been talking about up to this point, where I think it's the job of a theologian and a working theologian, a preacher, to bring a meaningful interpretation of what people are already experiencing. To place preaching or theologizing within the context, perhaps, of discipleship, where a leader provides a framework to help people understand what they're on about in the world as disciples. And I think that maybe one of the things that we can do is to think of it that way, is think of it as a tool for discipleship, rather than simply a way in which we use to attract people to church and to kind of put on the show. One of the things I'm very challenged about is the idea of, instead of being a teaching community, which is the way the church has generally seen ourselves, we teach truth. I'm intrigued by what it means to become a learning community, helping people to be learners, rather than having one person who's eloquent, and the more eloquent you are, of course, the more passivity you create in your audience, in a sense, because they can't reproduce it. One of the things I think the missional church, taken seriously as movement, is the recovery of the priesthood of all believers. I think preaching has generally been a function of what we'd seen as priestly types, or the kind of ecclesial types, and I actually wonder whether, again, that is just a way of, we were perfectly designed to produce what we're currently producing, and I wonder whether actually that it needs to become a thing of the people again, not so much the kind of province of the professionals, because I think actually the church needs to rediscover the kind of the sheer power, the ecclesiological secret weapon of God, is that the people of God ought to play. Everyone is an agent of the King. To a large degree, we've again seen or conceived of church and experienced it as something separate from society, disengaged from what's going on around about us. So one of the things I think we've become is very risk averse. And one of the challenges is actually to learn to go on an adventure again and learn how risk is important to living life well. And and if we become so risk averse that we kind of hover in a corner somewhere and in a safety kind of zone, that something fundamentally bad happens to us. And particularly as God's people, I think mission is risky. So that's one of the big challenges. The other thing is that I think discipleship fundamentally commits us to action learning models. You can say it's instruction, action, reflection, but I think in the end action plays a critical role. Forge Missionaries is an organisation I helped start. We train missionaries to the West. One of the things we do is to say, well, if most of us are experts in our current domain of information and things that we know. If I drew a circle around myself here, if you could envision the circle, I pretty much understand everything within my circle, at least, to a working degree. One of the challenges in thinking differently is that you can learn to think like a beginner, not an expert. So one of the things we do is we move people from the center to the circumference, where they're now 50-50. I know 50% and I don't know 50%, and we say just take 1/2 step more out. So now you don't know 75% and you only know 25%, and I reckon that's when you're ready to learn, you see. Because the chances of failure are much higher now. Your ego's at stake.